Welcome to the Bookish Ballerina Podcast, where we talk about ballet, stories, art, science, economics, music, and everything in between. I'm your host, Eleanor Stewart, and I am a rather bookish ballerina. Today, my guest is the wonderful K.B. Hoyle. She is an award-winning author of teen and middle grade novels, and she is the CEO and acquisitions editor at Owl's Nest Publishers. I hope you enjoy our wonderful conversation about creating books and the making of great literature.
Hello, and welcome to the Bookish Ballerina Podcast. To start off, what is your story?
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast today. My name is KB Hoyle, and I am the author of, now I've been chuckling about this lately because I keep forgetting how many now, especially because I'm perpetually writing books and also editing books now. But I think we're at 13. I'm the author of 13 books for teens and adolescents, and I'm writing the 14th book right now. And that is pretty much my story. I've been an author for over a decade, and now I am also the co-owner of a publishing house called Owl's Nest Publishers. We specifically publish books for teens and adolescents as well. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I've had just a really storied kind of career as an author. So again, maybe we'll talk a little bit about all the various things that I've done, over the past, since 2009, don't make me do math in my head, 2009 to 2023. And, I'm also a working mother. I have 4 sons, and both my husband and I now work out of the house. So 4 sons in the house. One of our sons is homeschooled, and it's just a giant, loud balancing act here at the house as I run the company, write books, and my husband also, works remotely from home too.
Yeah. So how do you juggle all of, especially working and being a mom?
It is a lot, and I'm not going to lie, sometimes I just have to take several deep breaths and, keep my temper in check, because it's like, and I always kind of joke, I'm 1/8 Irish, so they know the temper is like the Irish part of me. But it's a lot when you have 4 sons and you're sitting and you're trying to work, and we do have an office in the house that's a dedicated office. But these days, while I have a desk in there, I tend to let my husband have the office because he does a lot of remote calls. He works for a bank, so he's always doing conference calls. And as much as it's difficult for me to focus with, the boys running around the house, it's in many ways harder to focus if I'm sitting at my desk and my husband is talking on a conference call, at the desk right across the room from me. So working from home kind of looks like me sitting in a chair, managing my oldest son who's homeschooled, watching over what he's doing, and, doing things there as needed. And it's good when the younger boys are at school, but then they come home and, mom's sitting in the open space, and so they don't necessarily see me as working. They just kind of feel like they can walk up and talk to me at any moment, and that's where I kind of have to take several deep breaths sometimes, because it's like, no, you can't talk to me right now. I'm not available to you right now. I am working. And maintaining those boundaries, in case anyone's like, well, that's horrible, she's saying no to her children. No, maintaining those boundaries, because mom has to have work time as well. And then when I'm off of work time, then I can go and be full-time mom. So
That's so impressive.
It's insane, is what it is.
Okay, so what sparked your initial interest in writing?
Well, reading. I grew up loving reading, and I read from a very young age. My mom told me that I basically taught myself to read, and part of that was because I was just very stubborn, so I didn't like other people, telling me how to do things. So I was reading novels around the age of 6, easy novels. But I know I was reading the Chronicles of Narnia around that age, and my very, very favorite, my first favorite book was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Oh.
And I do remember this distinctly, that I wanted there to be more books like Narnia, because Narnia made me feel a certain way. It made me long for this sense of otherness, this feeling inside me, that the story evoked in me. I couldn't find other books that made me feel that way. There were a few, but whenever I talk to classrooms, like I go and talk to classrooms to do school visits, things like that, I always tell kids that they don't really know how good they have it these days. There's so many options of fantasy novels out there that are widely being published. But when I was a kid, because you're a lot younger than I am, you don't know what it was like either. When I was a kid, there wasn't nearly as much to choose from as far as just a variety of books. And so I kind of read and reread Narnia. And I remember going to my mom one day and just kind of saying, very sadly, will C.S. Lewis ever write any more Narnia books?
Yeah.
And she looked at me and said, well, C.S. Lewis is dead.
Oh.
And I was like, no. And that was what really, the revelation, the knowledge, the new knowledge of my little young brain that C.S. Lewis was dead was what inspired me to really want to become a writer, a novelist someday, was because I wanted to have more stories available to me that made me feel the way Narnia made me feel. And if he was dead, he wasn't going to do it. And I wasn't finding a whole lot of other authors. Like, I think the exceptions were George MacDonald and, J.R. Tolkien. They were kind of the only other two that I'd found that made me feel the way that Lewis felt. But beyond that, there wasn't anything, in the early 80s, that made me feel that way. So I started to think, well, what if I became an author someday? And it felt really daunting because, you look at a book when you're a small child and you think, how did anybody do this? This is like magic, how do you write a novel? But I carried that desire forward through my young years. And it was when I was about 11 or 12 that I sat down and started trying to write a novel for the first time.
Nice. So what was your process toward starting to become an author? Because I know it's obviously from the first time, it takes a while.
Yeah. Trying to become an author, for me, it was kind of cloaked in mystery. I didn't know how people did it. And again, I'm a product of my generation. These days, it's much easier to figure out how to become an author, because of the internet. So I'm the elder millennial generation. I was born in 83. I grew up with the internet. So as I was a teenager, the internet was, it was brand new. It was just kind of coming in. I'm that generation that remembers life before the internet, remembers when the internet came, and then, kind of figured it out. My whole generation figured it out, right? But I'm also old enough that when I was first trying to figure out how to become an author, publishing houses and agents were still not accepting email queries. So the first time I ever sat down to query a novel, I was actually typing physical query letters that I had to print and put in the mail, or some agencies were requesting faxed. Who faxes anything anymore? Like requesting faxed query letters. So the very first time, and I will say this too, I didn't actively pursue trying to be an author in college because I didn't know what to study to be an author. I didn't have good career direction. I went to a giant high school. It was a good high school, but it was just one of those like mega high schools. And I think I met with a college admissions counselor one time, and they were like, well, what do you like? What are you interested in? And I, rattled off subjects that I was interested in. And I don't think I ever said I want to be an author, because I was a creative, sort of, whimsical, one of those free spirits. And I was like, if you'd asked me in high school, what do you want to do? I would have been like, I want to be an author, but I also want to be an actress and a singer and an astronaut and I want to be Indiana Jones, and I want to be I wanted to be everything. So I didn't have good direction, through high school. I can't say that my parents encouraged me to be an author. I know my mom was kind of scared, about that idea of it too, of me being an author, because of how uncertain it is to be an author, which it is. It's not a very, for most people, if you're going to go be an author, most people, and I do mean this, but you just have to have your plan B. You have to have your other job on the side, because it's not a very stable, stream of money. Okay. And that's just the truth of it. So anyhow, all of that is also true of me. I just didn't know what to do. So I never had good career direction. So I didn't know where to go to college. I didn't know what to pursue. I didn't even know that there were things like creative writing degrees you could pursue, or any sort of publishing degrees or writing. So I went off to college, undeclared degree. I ended up majoring in history. I didn't take writing classes. I didn't think I needed writing classes, because I kind of thought, well, I am a naturally good writer. And that is a very, you see that a lot with writers too, with young writers who think they're all that, they just don't think that they need to be taught how to write. I was like that. And I've taught creative writing for many, many years, and I see that all the time with young writers, is they take creative writing because they love to write, but if you try to teach them anything, they kind of get a little uppity with you. You can't teach me how to write. I already know how to write. I was definitely like that too. So to come back around to, what was it like though? So initially, the first novel I ever queried, embarrassingly, was the one that I started writing when I was 11 or 12, because I just kept writing that through high school, and I finished it in college, and I was like, it's a masterpiece. I'm going to get this published. It was not a masterpiece, listeners. It was not. It was terrible. And, as anything,
Sorry. Did you do multiple drafts of that even?
I had revised it and revised it and revised it, but still, it was the brainchild of an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old. I honestly, I can't remember now how I was between 11 and 12. And something that it was like a patchwork quilt of the bad ideas of a teenager, of an adolescent. I mean, because most of the ideas that you have when you're very young are just not very good. You think they're good when you're that age, but then when you look back, if you go back to your writing journals, you probably have writing journals if you go back and look at it, you're like, oh my goodness, this is so cute, but also cringy, and I'm glad this is not out in the world, So I tried to put that stuff out in the world, and my first attempt to query a novel, unsurprisingly failed miserably, because I really didn't know what I was doing. Am I a naturally gifted writer? Yes, I'm a naturally gifted writer. Most people who, pursue publication and actually make it in the industry in any way, shape, or form are naturally gifted writers, but that doesn't mean that you don't need instruction. It doesn't mean that you don't need to be taught. It's kind of like how, most people who are professional athletes are naturally gifted athletes, right? Michael Jordan could naturally, dribble a basketball. He was naturally gifted to do basketball well. Michael Phelps, naturally a gifted swimmer. However, they need to be coached in order to, Michael Phelps needed to be coached to do what he did in the Olympics, so same is true of anybody who has any sort of natural gifting. And I needed to really be knocked down several notches. I needed to realize how bad that first novel was. I needed to realize how little I knew about writing and storytelling, in order to put my gifts to actual, practice. And so once I got knocked down several times, then I actually started some self-study because I was out of college by that point. I wasn't going back to college. So I really, really dug in. Having a history degree actually really helped me because it taught me how to research. It taught me how to do my own studying and how to learn things and to be dedicated. And I started to learn how to do the thing properly. And that's when I started writing. And writing better, writing well, but you never really stop learning and growing in your craft. If you just
Right.
no professional stops. And then by the time I started querying again, the whole querying game had changed and everything was going online, and it keeps changing. Honestly, it never really stays put.
So how did you go about publishing your first one? It was the sixth. That was your first, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first novel I ever published is the sixth, and that's the first of the Gateway Chronicles, which is my 6-book fantasy series for teens. And when that book came to be, I finished it, and then I got it edited, and I sat on it for a year, and I was trying to look at my options for querying it and publishing it. And to be perfectly frank, I had a baby. I had my first baby, and I was teaching full time, and I already had outlined the rest of the series. And I knew it was going to be a 6-book series. I already knew how it was going to end. I'd outlined the series. I was ready to write the second book, and I was just exhausted as well. And I had gone through all the rejection of that first experience with my first book, which was bad. But I was also looking at how much the industry had changed. And I decided that my best way forward with the 6 and with the Gateway Chronicles was to self-publish it because of the limitations that I had. We were very poor at the time too, and it's not that it costs money to query anything, but my just lack of general resources, and I didn't have money to start building my platform, to get an author website and things like that. And I was feeling kind of generally overwhelmed by the whole idea of it. And self-publishing was starting to become very popular and acceptable and not such a fringe thing anymore. And so I thought, I'm just going to self-publish this so that I can move forward and do the next book. Because if you pursue traditional publication, it often takes years to get your first book published, if it's ever picked up. And I was not willing to wait years because I had the rest of the series going, and I wasn't willing to put a big question mark on it either, about whether or not it would get picked up and whether or not I would be able to move forward and do the rest of the series. So I went ahead and self-published the first book, wrote the second book, self-published the second book, wrote the third book, self-published the third book. And then through a series of fantastic coincidences, providence, I ended up getting picked up by a small press, an independent press that was a very good independent press, not Vanity or Hybrid or anything like that. And they re-released the first 3 books in 2012 and signed me for the rest of the series. So I was able to traditionally small press publish the entirety of the Gateway Chronicles.
Very cool. So 2 kind of similar questions. We kind of covered what your favorite book when you were young. Do you have a different favorite book now? And then also, what is your favorite book you've written?
So my favorite book of all time, and I do say it's one book because that's how he intended it, is The Lord of the Rings. As much as I love and cherish Narnia, and always will, but, as I grew, and I'm not going to say I matured out of Narnia because you don't mature out of reading the Chronicles of Narnia, but just as far as my tastes, were concerned, as for literary tastes, The Lord of the Rings is more elevated in language, for sure, because it's not written for quite as young of an audience. And so as I got a little older and I had loved The Hobbit when I was young. Loved The Hobbit. And so I first read The Hobbit when I was 8. And the little story about that is that I remember that The Hobbit was the first book I ever read and closed it and sat and thought to myself, that was a good book. I don't know why it was a good book, but that was a good book. You know, it just had that sense in it where there was like an innate goodness. You know, Narnia is kind of obviously good, you know, like it's got those allegorical elements to it where you can kind of point to specific lines in Narnia and any of the Narnia books. You can point to specific lines that are like profound and deep and, you know, you kind of mull on them. The Hobbit isn't like that. The Hobbit is more of a straight fantasy. It's the goodness of it is more in the story structure, which I didn't know that at the time. I know it now, having studied the book, but it's more under the surface. So it's more of a straight fantasy on the surface. There's adventure and these great characters and whatnot. It's not as, you know, obviously profound, quote unquote, but I remember closing it as an 8-year-old and just sitting and like trying to put my finger on why it had touched me so deeply and not being able to express why it had, other than that it did. And then for the first time in my life, opening the book back to the beginning and starting it all over again, you know, from the very beginning without any sort of weight. And so when I got a little bit older, I read The Lord of the Rings, and it was like turn the dial up to 11. You know, the same experience, but just turn it up to 11. And I've never read anything that has moved me as profoundly as The Lord of the Rings. See, I'm going to get a little, I'll get choked up. I read The Lord, just thinking about it, you know, I read The Lord of the Rings aloud to my children during lockdown in 2020, and I could not read a single chapter without weeping.
I love that. I cried when I got near the end, and then the last chapter just destroyed me. It's like, no.
Well, the more you read it, like it's one of those, it just grows, it gets bigger and bigger. You know, I think the older you get too, and that's the thing. And Narnia is the same way. Like I'm reading the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to my youngest too right now. I'm having a hard time. I'm like reaching the point where I'm like crying every chapter.
Yeah.
They're always just like, Mom, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, you don't understand. But, you know, these stories, they do grow with you as you grow, as good books should. But The Lord of the Rings is just my absolute favorite. Just just to articulate, you know, the deep thoughts and profound language. My husband and I just got back from a trip to the UK actually, and we were able to go to the kilns where C.S. Lewis lived, and we visited Lewis's grave and his church. I've done that before, but then we also went over to Wolvercote Cemetery, which is where is where Tolkien and his wife are buried. And I'd never done that before. My husband and I just kind of stood there, you know, at the graveside, just kind of crying, and I was like, is this weird? Are we being weird? And he's like, no, this is like, it's, you know, it's like a pilgrimage. I was like, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So what is your favorite book that you have written?
That I have written. Oh, I always have a hard time answering this question.
Okay.
I would say, so I might have to, it's hard. It's like choosing a favorite one of your children. I don't know. I mean, if we go kind of by series, of the Gateway Chronicles, my favorite is The Scroll.
Oh.
So of the, and that's always, I think it's kind of funny because I think for readers, The Scroll tends to be their least favorite. No, maybe not the least favorite, but it's not amongst the top. But The Scroll is my favorite. That's book 5 of the Gateway Chronicles. I think readers don't like it because people like it, don't get me wrong, but I think it's not amongst the favorite because it's the only one that has a true cliffhanger. And I think people don't like that. but I liked it because I like to torment the readers.
Yeah.
But of the Breeder Cycle, which is my dystopian series, my favorite is Hunter. And it's actually, Hunter is one of my least read books. I think it's
I
because
haven't read it yet.
That's
I've read a lot of yours.
It kind of came out without fanfare because my publishing house that I was with had dissolved, and I'd had to get all the rights to my books back. And I hadn't finished the Breeder Cycle, but I'd had plans to finish it, and so I ended up writing Hunter on my own and just releasing it on my own because I needed to finish the series, and it didn't have the, the backing of the publishing house or anything like that. It also came out right before the pandemic, and it was just kind of bad timing. Ironically, it is about a pandemic, and then it came out right before a pandemic, and I felt like I really shouldn't be promoting it because that just felt crass. So I didn't really promote it a whole lot. It came out in November of 2019, and then we were getting all this, hearing things about this pandemic, and I was like, I think I should stop promoting this book. I actually almost pulled the book from publication because I just felt like it was crass, but then I was like, I don't need to do that. It's not like I did it. Who can predict that, what's going to happen in the world?
Yeah.
But I really like Hunter. I think it is one of some of my best work, if I'm allowed to say that. But it's also kind of a harder read, but I enjoyed, stretching myself like that. And then, I've released so far 3 books with Owl's Nest Publishers, which is the publishing house that I formed here, in Madison, Wisconsin with my best friend. And, we released books from all sorts of authors so far. But the 3 books that I've done with them are Son of the Deep and Orion and the Starborn, and, a little kind of Southern Gothic fairy tale called The Queen of Ebenezer. And Son of the Deep is a standalone that is also, though, part of a series. So it's standalone in a series, so there's going to be a bunch of these fairy tales that are all connected in the same universe. And I love Son of the Deep. I think it's different, again, than anything else that I've written. And I would definitely say it's one of my favorite things that I've done. Orion and the Starborn is also one of my favorites, though. Yeah. It is, people have been asking me for years to write more of the Gateway Chronicles, but the Gateway Chronicles is really done. I mean, it's a complete story. I could come up with another story in that universe, but I really want to go on and write stories in other universes. And Orion and the Starborn is going to be another series that is very much like the Gateway Chronicles, in style and of storytelling and format and similar themes and whatnot, even though it's also going to be very different. And it's science fantasy, so it's kind of like A Wrinkle in Time as far as, the settings and adventure is it's like magic in space. People are like, what's science fantasy? Magic in space. No spaceships, magic in space. And I love it. It's just the sort of book that, again, I would have wanted to read. I'm going all the way back to when I was 6 years old. I've always written the sorts of books that I want to read, and that I don't see being written. And that has always been something that has driven my storytelling. And so if you're ever just dissatisfied, anyone out there, if you're ever just dissatisfied with what you're finding in the bookstores, come and read one of my books, because I guarantee you I'm going to be writing something that you're not finding in the bookstores, because that's kind of the point of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But also, again, to the Queen of Ebenezer is a very personal book. It's really short if you need a quick little read. And that one is really, really personal. I was just kind of working through some grief and over the last several years, and it's based on a real location that was near my house in Alabama before we moved up here, and it's also very sweet and hopeful. I don't write sad stories. I mean, I write sad stories, but they have happy endings, or at least bittersweet endings. So Yeah, I don't have one favorite.
Okay. Nice. I remember when I read The Bone Whistle, I was maybe, I don't know, I was maybe 13. And we were driving. I was in the back seat and I finished it and I was like, that is the most well-written ending of a story I have ever read. Amazing. Every single detail was pulled back together in one piece. It was amazing.
I try really hard because, again, I tend to be very dissatisfied when I read books, especially the ends of series. Mm-hmm. So, even if I'm really enjoying a series that, I've picked up in the bookstore or something like that, I tend to get to the end of the series and feel let down and feel dissatisfied. Same is true of watching a show on TV. You kind of get to the last seasons sometimes or the last episode and you're like, really? But what about this? But what about that? There's always loose threads and subplots that get lost, and that bothers me as a storyteller, just epically.
Yes, I know.
How could they do that to us? And I don't believe in telling stories that way. I don't believe in randomness. I believe that if you are going to tell a story, you should do it right. I believe that everything should have a point. And so I do plot my stories. And I'm not going to say down to the last detail because that makes it sound like it's rigid. And of course you want your stories to be organic and whatnot. But, again, if you find yourself constantly dissatisfied with series, I kind of pride myself on writing series that, if I start a series, all right, let me put it this way. I don't start writing a series until I know how it ends. And so I will be working towards a very particular ending that I've had in mind for years. I never start writing until I've got the ending settled in my mind. And so my stories tend to be kind of puzzle box stories too, where there's all sorts of clues. They're not random. And so when you get to the end, you'll go, oh, that's what that meant. And it also kind of gives you a little mystery to unfold along the way too.
Okay, I know we're kind of running low on time, but tell us about Owl's Nest Publishers.
So Owl's Nest sprang out of a lot of things. It sprang out of some disappointment, some professional disappointment on my end. It sprang out of needs that we saw. It sprang out of our desire to make space in the publishing industry. So after my publishing house that I was with dissolved, and that was I finished completely with them. It was kind of a slow dissolve. I finished completely with them in 2016, and then I went out and I wanted to do the next thing in my career, so I went out and I got an agent. And I know that I make that sound easy. It is not easy at all. It is one of the hardest things to do as in the writing industry, especially if you're writing fiction. Especially if you're writing fiction for young adults, which is totally saturated industry. So it took me about a year to get an agent, and I was very, very happy with my agent, and we did, lots of good things, but never ended up securing a book deal, unfortunately, and ended up parting ways with him amicably in January of 2020. Well, January of 2020, nobody knew what was going to happen in the world, and the way the pandemic, I thought, okay, this is fine, don't panic, you'll find another agent, everything's going to be fine. Well, everything was not fine. The publishing industry just kind of tanked during the pandemic. Agents weren't picking up new clients. Imprints were closing at publishing houses. It was a terrible time to try and find a new agent. And but it also kind of helped me. Well, and all my kids came home to homeschool too. It's like I suddenly just turned into a homeschool mom, and my career felt like it was dead in the water. But it also gave me some time to be introspective about what I was doing, because again, as I've already said, I kind of publish sorts of books that you're not really finding in the bookstore. Right. And that was part of my frustration is I wasn't getting a big book deal partially because of that. I'm fairly certain. And, one of the things that Katie and I, who started Owl's Nest with me, are seeing, and that's a very commonly voiced problem in the YA industry, is that the YA industry doesn't really publish, I'm speaking in generalities, but doesn't really publish books for real teenagers anymore. That they're driven more so by their adult readership than by their teen readership. So you go and you pick up books on the YA shelves, and you'll have characters that are, 17 on the page, but they're the way they talk, their desires, their thoughts, their romantic, antics and whatnot, are really more adult than teenage.
Yeah.
So Katie and I got talking about, and Katie has all sorts of experience in the book review world, and she and I got talking about what we could possibly do to make space in the industry for authors like me who have struggled to find a way to publish in this world for teenagers, and for parents who are constantly looking for books like mine that they're not finding on the bookshelves that are appropriate for their kids to read. And I'm not just talking about content, though, appropriate for their kids to read, but also that really reflect real teenagers where they are. Like, where are all the books that have 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old protagonists? It's really hard to find. So that's where Owl's Nest kind of came from, is we wanted to start a publishing house that was a dedicated publishing house for books that are dedicated specifically to real teenagers. We don't even call our books YA because YA kind of means its own thing these days. It has almost become like a genre rather than an audience. So yeah, that's where Owl's Nest came from. And we have, I don't know how many releases now because now I'm on the spot, but you can go to owlsnestpublishers.com to see what we're doing. We're doing great things.
Yes, I love following all of that. Okay, very quickly before you leave, this can be a 2-word answer, but what is one thing you wish you could teach everyone, and what is one thing you wish to learn more about?
One thing I wish I could teach everyone about the publishing industry?
It can be in general, but it definitely can be.
One thing I wish I could teach everyone. I just wish that I could teach everyone what a good story really is. Because I think that we're facing a lot of general illiteracy these days. I see a lot of posts on social media about, oh, this book is so amazing, this book is so amazing, and I'll pick it up and read it, and it's not. Like really, 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 really bad books. I'm not even, sometimes generally it's a combination of the writing is terrible, the storytelling is terrible, the themes are terrible, everything is terrible about it, and these books are being lauded as the most amazing things ever. So I really wish that I could. Yeah.
You say that.
Yeah. Relatable. You know what I'm talking about.
I know.
I really wish that I could just generally just have a lesson for everybody about what goodness in a story in a book really looks like. So up the cultural literacy levels, basically. What I wish I could learn, I wish I could learn how to connect. This, again, is very specific to me and my particular needs right now as a business owner and author. How to connect my stories and our stories at Owl's Nest directly to the readers that we know really desire them, because I want them and need them. Because again, we are offering these good stories that are really, really good, but it's very difficult. Sales is connecting with the people who need them is really difficult in such a saturated world, where the only books that really get talked about on social media are the ones that tend to be not as good as you would hope that they would be. So
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming to share all of your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
To learn more about KB Hoyle, follow her on Instagram at kbhoyle.author. To learn more about Owl's Nest Publishers, go online to owlsnestpublishers.com or follow them on Instagram at Owl's Nest Publishers. To learn more about me and all I am doing with the Bookish Ballerina Podcast, go to Instagram and follow at the.bookish.ballerina and at the.bookish.ballerina.podcast. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you for the next episode.